Welcome back to the Your Project Shepherd Construction Podcast. Our last episode ended with Brian and Heather signing a contract that Derek, their builder, found online, and they finally got approved for their construction loan. Despite some pushback from Rick, the architect, Heather still thinks they've made the right choice by hiring Derek. And in the first month after closing on the loan, Derek has made great progress, apparently. He's gotten the foundation poured and the framing lumber is being delivered this week. Everyone's starting to feel good. But opening her email one evening, Heather finds they've received Derek's first invoice. She thinks to herself that it seems a little early. They're only about to start framing. When Brian comes home from work that night, she spins around the laptop and shows them Derek's invoice. I cannot believe this, Brian says. Is he seriously trying to charge us for his insurance and gas? This is not what we agreed on. Well, what did we actually agree on? Heather asked. I told you what Rick said about that contract. Look, Brian said, I'm sure Rick's still just annoyed he's not getting kickbacks from us using one of his builders. Don't worry, I'll have a good talk with Derek. The next morning, Heather and Brian crowd around his phone as they call Derek on the speaker. How are my favorite clients doing? Derek asks. Good morning, Derek, Brian says. We need to discuss this invoice. We never talked about paying for your overhead costs. Well, what do you mean overhead costs? Those are the costs of building this house. The insurance is required by the bank, and I use that gas driving to your job site. Brian takes a deep breath and says, yeah, but that's what that 10% on the cost plus is for. You're making a lot of money in markup on this job, and we are not paying separately for your gas and insurance. At this point, I'm surprised that you didn't ask to be reimbursed for your lunches, too. Brian says, Derek, that was a joke, but we are not paying for your insurance, gas, mileage, or anything else. Those are your costs of doing business. Derek says, honestly, I've been doing some math, and I'm starting to get worried. I think that 10% is not going to be enough to pay my bills or my family's expenses. Brian says, look, we signed a contract, and we have to stick to it. Are we on the same page? Yeah, Derek concedes. Once things really get started, I guess it won't or shouldn't be an issue anymore. Honestly, there have been a lot of hurdles to get to this point, but Derek is feeling good about having his first custom home underway, and he's sure that cash flow is going to improve as things finally start to move. The next week, framing materials get delivered, and Derek meets the framer on site. As they're looking over the plans, the framer calls Derek over to confirm some details. The framer points out that the engineer's plans show number 2 lumber for the walls, but it looks like all this lumber that you ordered is number 3. I've only seen that grade used for walls and track homes. What's going on? Well, the truth is that Derek already made the executive decision to save money on the budget and go with the lower grade lumber. He told Brian and Heather that he was going to look for ways to keep the cost under control. It shouldn't be a big deal, and he remembers hearing his former boss blow off some more concerns. He's got this. A few weeks later, Rick is driving the neighborhood and sees what appears to be great progress on the job site. He decides to pop in for a visit, hoping to maybe catch Derek and finally meet him. Walking in, he notices a conversation taking place between a young man and an older man who appears to be a framer. The two are comparing the architectural and engineering plans. That must be Derek, Rick thinks to himself. But instead of introducing himself, he decides to go on a self-guided tour. Immediately, he notices the walls look a little off. He notices a number 3 grade stamp on the studs. He can't believe Heather signed off on this after all that talk of a high-end custom home. I mean, number 3 is way different than number 2. Number 2 is more expensive for a good reason. It's stronger and typically straighter. Number 3 is generally used in much cheaper homes, and it's used in like non-structural applications like blocking and bracing. If it is used in a wall, later in the process, builders will use a heavy orange peel drywall texture to help cover the imperfections. Essentially, this is going to prevent Heather's plans for the smooth walls she talks so much about. Rick leaves the site as quietly as he arrived. Once in his car, he called Heather and got her voicemail. Hey Heather, Rick here. I just swung by your site as I promised, and there are a few things I think you should know. Give me a call back. Riding in their car, Heather silenced her ringing phone as they pulled up to the site of their new home. Derek texted them earlier about the great progress being made, and they couldn't wait to see it with their own eyes. It was obvious from the outside that framing had started, and Brian and Heather were already starting to feel a sense of relief. However, as they walked into the new home, Heather stopped, looked up, and stared menacingly at a big beam dropping below the ceiling in their future living room. What is that? She asked. Trying to reduce his wife's stress, Brian called Derek, who was driving home after a long day on the job. Yeah, I thought that was a fun thing that you had the engineer add, Derek said. We didn't have the engineer add anything. We want to stick to these plans, Brian said. If there's differences, we need to know. Look, y'all were sent the engineer's plans. I mean, you're the one that forwarded them to me. How am I supposed to know they're wrong? Plus, that beam's cool. I would just leave it and wrap it in decorative wood. After several hours of phone tag between Rick and Derek and Brian, they finally got some answers. No, it wasn't on the plans that Rick made for them. However, the engineer added it to account for structural support needs. Brian and Heather didn't know there was any difference between the two plans because they didn't know to check, and now they're wondering what else has been done without their approval. Derek argued that his job is to follow the plans, and that's what he did. Even if he were able to eat the cost of removing the beam, he shouldn't have to. They made it clear they're on a cost-plus payment model. For once, Derek feels that's working in his favor. The options are to leave it, which Derek is in favor of to save time, money, and energy, or Brian and Heather can spend $3,000 more to have it moved, which they can't really afford at this point either. Ultimately, Heather tells Brian that she can live with the beam if it means not having to spend thousands more dollars. So they take Derek's suggestion to wrap the beam in a decorative manner and make it a feature in their new home. While construction has just begun on this home, it's becoming apparent that Derek's lack of experience is causing problems. In all this back and forth about the beam, Rick mentioned that there may be some other missteps that have occurred. Heather feels too overwhelmed to get into those right now. According to Rick, Derek is skirting the specs to save money, but that's likely going to cost Brian and Heather further down the road. When the framer pointed out discrepancies in the plans, Derek made the decision to go with the cheaper options rather than communicate with the engineer, Rick, Brian, or Heather. While Brian and Heather are relieved that the home build is moving forward, they're annoyed their custom home is already looking much different than the plans. Brian continues to assure Heather that it's all going to work out. After all, this is where they're going to welcome their next child and raise their family. It has to work out. But will everything work out? Make sure to tune in next time to learn more about the missteps that Rick has warned Brian and Heather about. Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for another edition of the Your Project Shepherd podcast. I'm your host, Curtis Lawson, and today we're going to dive into the world of engineering and how that relates to the custom home process. Sitting here to my left, I've got my friend and a very essential business partner, Karl Breckon with BEC Engineers and Consultants. Hey, Karl.
Hey, how you doing?
Doing great. Thanks for joining us today. We've been working together for a long time now, and it's always a pleasure to collaborate with you on projects. You guys put out great work. You listen to us, you help solve problems, and you're always super responsive when things come up, and I really appreciate that.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
As I was prepping for today's show, I went to your website, and I always get on my guest website and just kind of, even if I've seen it before and been working with you for a long time, I always like to go to the website and look and see what you have on there. But right on your homepage of your website, in the middle of the picture, it says, "Whatever it takes," Karl Breckon, a quote. So tell me about that and how that relates to your business.
Okay, well, I believe that we do as a business is whatever it takes. And I mean, whatever it takes to get the project done, whatever it takes to satisfy our customers, just to make sure that we're satisfying things. So that's our motto of the company.
That's what I love to hear. That's why we like working with you guys, and we send all of our customers to you guys too. So, Karl, our friends Brian and Heather that we just heard the story about, they've had a pretty rough go of things.
They certainly have.
Way back toward the beginning of that story, their home designer had completed his designs. He got him a couple of proposals from engineers. One was a firm who, in his words, kind of over-designs everything, and the builders say he drives up their costs. And that guy was around $6,000 for the engineering on this property. The other proposal was from a company who he said mostly does work for production homes, spec builders, and his proposal was only like $2,000. And of course, being the prudent shoppers that they are, they went with a cheaper option because, it's just engineering. What could go wrong, right? So tell me, what's the difference between kind of a cheap engineer, so to speak, or maybe somebody who just stamps plans for spec homes, and a company like BEC that does structural design, civil design for custom homes?
Well, it's two different or two different arenas that you're playing in. On production homes, everything is basically the same. Yes, there's different elevations and things like that, but basically the homes are pretty much alike. When you get into the custom side, particularly in this case where the home was in a floodplain. So that's a big difference. So you got to really know what you're doing because it's a different foundation design. It's a different design of how you're going to support the home. How high is it going to be off the ground? Does that include the civil drawings for that price that they're talking about? So in doing that, when you're picking an engineer, you got to make sure that, one, have they done this before? Do they know what they're talking about? Do they know the regulations for floodplains in this example that we're talking about with Brian and Heather? And make sure that's going to satisfy the city when you take those for a permit. Because it doesn't do you any good to go in and have these plans that are done by a production engineering type and didn't know that it's supposed to be raised 2 foot above the 500-year designated flood elevation. Didn't know what the design was, didn't know how to mitigate, didn't know the conveyance analysis. There's a lot of details that go into that.
So the next problem for them that came up was, the material prices had gone up, and we know something about material prices escalating. We've been dealing with that for the last, 12 months or so here. So the builder knows they're on a budget, and so, he thinks he's helping him out, I guess. It's a cost plus contract. So he's helping them out. So he's subbing some materials to save money. Maybe he used a different type of studs. Maybe he used thermoply instead of OSB sheathing, whatever. But what's the problem here? Like, he's just trying to help them out and save them money. But what's the problem with him just making some substitutions on the fly?
Well, has those substitutions been checked from an engineering perspective? Does a 2x12, is that equal to an engineered beam? You don't know until what's the span. What are you talking about? Some of these homes, especially the custom homes, have big great rooms and kitchens that are joined together, so it's all one big room. And those have different engineering things that you need to take to consider that's going to support the loads, particularly in a 2-story house with the loads above. Does that substitution really work? Don't know until you run the numbers and see.
Right. And so swapping things like, sheathing on the outside of a house, going from a, let's say like a 3/4 inch sheathing to a 1/2 inch sheathing, or going from 1/2 inch to using a thermoply sheathing. I mean, that stuff can even have big implications, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. So, because the sheathing is what we use for shear walls. I know probably some of your listeners don't know what that means, but a shear wall holds a house up if there's a windstorm. And here in Houston, we are in a windstorm area. So you got to be careful about that the sheathing is on, it's done right, and it's nailed to the studs correct.
That could be a code issue as well, right? And so hopefully the city inspector is going to catch that.
Doubtful.
So, if the builder doesn't care, maybe the city's going to catch some of that. But what should a kind of a prudent homeowner do after the framing goes up? Do you guys offer some services that they should take advantage of after framing? Oh, definitely.
So when the homeowner is doing their build, we're there as their insurance policy, quote unquote, that we go in and make sure that the framing is installed per plans. If it's not installed per plans, we write it down, we write a letter and say, this needs to be changed. Recently, because of all the material changes, the material costs going up, we've had letters that are 2 pages long with all the deficiencies that we've caught.
Wow.
During the framing stage. And some of these things you got to really pay attention. Yes, some are acceptable, but some aren't. And of course, the builders don't like it because they were making them change things out. But it's got to be right. It's here for the long term. What I always tell my people is we're building people's dreams. We're designing the dreams, and the builders, of course, building their dream. And they don't want that. We don't want that dream to become a nightmare.
Right. So other than that framing inspection, which is super important, what other inspections do you guys offer? At what phases do you recommend that people get an engineer involved?
Well, the engineer should be involved from the beginning with the design team. What are they building? What's their goals? Let's look at some different things. Like we can work with the architects and the builders, and we like to have a teamwork atmosphere because that's the team that's going to be building somebody's dream. And so we want to make sure that that's right. And as far as the other inspections, it starts from the beginning before you pour the foundation. We should go out there and look, make sure that the reinforcing is installed per plan, that it's there right, and the beams are all there, the reinforcing is all there, the beams are deep enough, and there's things that are, if they want shower drops, there's lots of details that go into that, so the makeup has to be right.
I joked about the city inspectors, maybe they would catch mistakes or substitutions, maybe not. But, there's some truth there, right? I mean, the city inspectors, they're probably overworked, at least here in Houston. They've had a record number of plans in the city, houses being built. And so those inspectors, there's not that many of them. So they're overworked, probably underpaid, maybe not always the best trained inspectors. I'm not knocking the city of Houston guys. There's a lot of great people there, but honestly, there's some people there that are kind of green. And, in my experience, those inspectors kind of have like some things that they look for, that kind of like their pet peeves that they watch out for on a project. And so like they might always pick on one thing, but then they overlook other things. I mean, I've had framing inspections where one inspector will come out and catch one thing, another inspector will come out and catch something else and ignore something else. A third inspector will come out and not care about the other two things, but he has something new, right? So, having the engineer do inspections, and even the architect, having that second and third set of eyes can make a real difference in
definitely
catching these problems.
Definitely. Because, I mean, like you said, these city inspectors, they are overworked. There's a lot of houses going up. There's a lot of building going on right now. And sometimes if they see and they'll ask if there's an engineer there, they'll just do a drive-by and they say, because they know they're going to get a letter.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, we're liable for that structure. We want to make sure it's right, because it's our liability, but it's also our reputation that's on the line.
Right. And those inspections that you provide, and also that the architects provide, I think some builders might, kind of cringe at that. They see those as being adversarial. Even they're like, oh man, I got to do an engineering inspection, or that architect's doing CA, and I got to deal with these guys coming out and poking around my job site, right? Those inspections don't have to be adversarial. They shouldn't be adversarial, right?
They shouldn't be. Like I said, we're a team. The architect, the engineer, the builder, we're all a team. So we're here to get the job done, most cost effective, and as quickly as possible.
The end goal is to give the customer the best product. Like you said, we're building what their dream is. Even good architects, good engineers, good builders, we all make mistakes. We're all human.
We're all human.
I don't think I've ever seen a perfect set of drawings from anybody. There's always some, even if it's not a major mistake, it's something that, hey, this doesn't quite line up. There's a question, and so having that extra set of eyes, pick the phone up and call you and say, hey, I've got this issue that we found. Let's meet on site and talk about it, right?
Most of the times when we find issues that happen out in the field, it's because, like, for example, the architectural drawings have changed, or the homeowner comes out, the client comes out, they look at it and they say, Curtis, I'd want this bedroom wall to move over 2 feet. Well, does the joist work? Does that take the loads? Where does that go? And so, we work with you and get through those issues, but it's hard for people to envision going from a 2D plan to a 3D.
Oh yeah. So, I love the phrase trust but verify, right? That's like one of my favorite phrases in this business. I mean, you think you hired a great builder or a great architect or whatever, trust but verify and make sure it's done the right way. Don't just take the guy's word for it,
Well, as you know, you're only good as your worst sub.
Right. And so, the architect, the builder, the engineer, the building performance guy, like if somebody like Toner's involved, they all really need to be on the same page from the very beginning of the project during design, to make sure that the right products are specified, that those products work together. Certain products just shouldn't be used in combination, right?
That's right. And the other thing is, we like to work with the architect and builder, say, okay, if we just move this wall over 6 inches, now we get the first and second floor walls lining up. And that makes a big difference in a cost-effective design, because you're not have the load away from the walls, because you want those loads to come all the way down to the foundation.
And so if you're engaged at the very beginning of the project, and we do this all the time. Like when we're designing a house, whether we're doing it in house or with an architect, one of the first things we talk about is, hey, how are we going to route our mechanical systems? Our end goal is to have these open spans. And so all those conversations are going to involve you guys to make sure that, kind of what's in our head and what's on paper can actually be built. And we don't get in the field and all of a sudden, hey, there's this beam in the way.
I wish I had a nickel for every time I heard that.
Trying to run my AC, but this beam is right in the middle where the duct has to go.
And we think about that during the design stage too. And we'll talk to the architect and say, hey, like I said, what if we move this, or what if we just take move this column over to here so you can get your AC through and we can run it over this wall instead of trying to route it all the way around the whole building.
Yeah. So I think people think of the engineer as getting the plans kind of after the architect's finished doing his work. And a lot of people do that, right? I mean, that's probably how you get most of your plans. It's kind of after they're done. And then you're kind of coming in and playing cleanup and making decisions how to change something that's already been designed, maybe. But
well, that's where we talk to the architect and go through it. If we see something in there that doesn't make sense, say, hey, Mr. Architect, let's talk about this. Let's go through these plans and come up with a design that's going to work and is much easier to build.
I've also seen situations where people, maybe they balk at spending a little more money on something engineering wise, like, hey, I don't really want to have that steel framing, or I don't want to pay for that big beam to get put in. Let's change this. But then they start living in the house and they're like, man, I really wish I'd have done that. So spending maybe a little bit more on some engineered product or on engineering design or whatever, it might hurt for $5,000 or $10,000 when you're building a custom home, which in the grand scheme of things isn't that much in a custom home. At the end of the day, they're going to be happier when they're living in it because they're going to see what they had really envisioned, right?
Again, you're building their dream.
Yeah.
So yeah, those kind of things need to be talked about. So yeah, okay, you have this 35-foot span here that you want. Well, that's going to be steel. But if we just did this and this, we might be able to take that steel out and just use an engineered beam. But you have to make that decision because now it's
right.
It's not as open as it was. Now, if you want to put a steel beam, no problem.
Yeah, we've been through that recently. I don't know if it was you or Reese, but we had a design where they had a ton of steel, and we're like, we got to get the steel budget down, but that's going to mean having a column here, right? And so we went to the client. We're like, hey, Mr. Homeowner, are you okay with having a column here on your patio instead of this beautiful big cantilevered balcony? And at the end of the day, they said, yeah, I'm okay with the column because it's going to save me $30,000. So,
and those are the decisions that, we need to talk about. That's what we're here for, is to help them make that decision. Now, some people say, no, I don't want that column in there. Go put it in a steel beam.
Okay, well, you got to pay for it, right? There's no free lunch. So, back to Brian and Heather, we've seen them make some pretty big mistakes in this process. But tell me, what are some common, maybe recurring mistakes that you see or that you've seen over the years, you've seen homeowners make, or even builders?
Including me.
Sure. And me too. I could write a book about this.
Oh, yeah, definitely. So I think what people are going, especially with a custom home, is they're going to go and say, don't necessarily want the cheapest person that's out there, because there's going to be additional costs going down the road that you did not foresee. So you want somebody with experience. And for a custom home, get the design team and the builder involved from day one, and go through these plans that this is what you want, and make sure that's what you really want. So that's one of the mistakes. And then also saying, okay, I want a 5-bedroom home. Well, when you get the construction costs, what it's going to cost to do that, well, that's not in the budget. Start out with, this is the budget. And then, people like you and me and the architect, we can sit down with them and say, okay, this is what that's going to buy you for that budget.
Design to the budget. I think people get that order wrong, right? They're like, oh, we're going to design this home, like Brian and Heather did in their store. They got their plans on the internet, then they sent it to Rick, the designer, and he designs this amazing home that's 5 bedrooms, a game room, a media room, and all of a sudden it's 4,000 or 5,000 square feet, and they're like,
Well, that's, and that's the thing. And getting plans off the internet, I am not a fan of that at all. So we see those things, and that's not designed for Houston. Houston is a totally different design from what those plans you're going to see on the internet, because it's you got to design for this area. It's, there's no two areas that are alike. And Houston is definitely a lot different because of our soils and what happens with our soils. With the clay soils here, foundations move a lot. So that's a totally different design than you're going to have up in
Colorado
or Florida or any place like that.
So aside from mistakes that you've seen people make, what are some red flags maybe that customers should watch out for when they're going into this process and they're interviewing a builder or even an architect? What are some red flags that people should watch out for?
I say the first one, you got to be interviewing probably the architect first, because that's who's going to design the home at the end of the day. Have they done this before? Have they done similar homes before? Or are they just doing production homes? Or are they just doing townhomes, which is all fine, and that has its own place. But have they done custom homes before? Have they done a home like you're wanting? And you have to have a good relationship with them. Do you get a warm, fuzzy feeling when you're talking to the architect? Do you like them? Yeah.
Are they going to try to push their ideas on you? Or are they going to listen to you? Of course, there's different schools of thought on that. I mean, some people go to an architect because they love that architect's vision and they trust what that guy's going to design, right? And then some people, they want the architect to listen to them more and do what they want.
You got to be able to listen to what the customer wants. At the end of the day, and there's some great architects out there that design really, really nice homes. And I don't have that kind of brain to do what they do.
Yeah.
And, but they're very smart people who really come up with some really interesting designs.
I think that building a house today is way more complex than it was 20 years ago, for sure more than 50 years ago. Some of that's energy code related. Some of it's, the houses are being built tighter. And then, of course, from your perspective, some of that is, land is in short supply. And so we're building houses on locations that are maybe less than optimal. Maybe we shouldn't be building houses in a swamp or in a floodplain. That's another discussion. And then some of it's just technology. We're trying to cram 10 pounds of stuff into a 5-pound box here.
Right.
And then at the same time, there's also kind of this low barrier to entry to getting into the construction business in Texas. We don't have any licensing or regulation for builders. So you can just print a business card or slap a magnet on your truck and boom, you're a builder, right?
That's right. A dog and a pickup truck's all you need.
That's right. So other parts of the country that people may be listening, they're not as loose as we are here. But anyway, hey, how do you see those things, that the complexity of projects, of homes, weird site conditions, and then also this low barrier to entry to builders? How do you see all those things affecting the outcome of a construction project?
I mean, you're right. I mean, we are in shorter supply of land, even though Texas is very, very big. But people want to live closer to downtown, closer to their jobs, especially with gas prices these days. So they want to drive as far. So, and those properties, the prime properties are probably already gone.
Yeah.
So you're buying maybe a house that you're going to tear down and build, like they do over in Bel Air and Westview and those areas. But a lot of those properties are already gone. So it does make it more difficult. And it's more difficult as you get into these areas. And also because of the way the designs are, like you said, they're tight. The houses are tighter. The codes are different. Materials are different. The rooms are much more open. So that makes it a little bit more of a difficult design process.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're trying to be energy efficient on top of all that. So a lot of times you're going with 2x6 walls on the exterior instead of 2x4s because you need the insulation. You need that to get into to meet the insulation, the new insulation codes or the new energy codes. Then these days you have to have a part of the roof that's solar ready.
You have to support the weight potentially of those solar panels that are going to be put up there.
So, and that's a Houston code. So the codes have gotten much more stringent than they were. And as you do, the building materials are a lot different than they used to be. And I think the biggest change that I see is there's a lot less walls. And then people want slope ceilings, vaulted ceilings. So everything formed by rafters, which makes designing those type of homes it's a challenge.
Yeah. And executing them too. We do a lot of consulting forensic consulting and, getting involved in projects that went bad. And most of the problems that we see are a builder, usually it's a combination, a builder and architect together, maybe designed to build something they weren't quite qualified for. And they didn't take all these factors into account that we're discussing. And that just long-term affects the building performance.
Oh, yeah.
The building science, so let's just touch on building performance real quick. What does, building performance mean to you as an engineer?
Well, there's a lot of different meanings to that. That's a broad subject.
Sure.
But for me, building performance means structurally it's sound. It's going to stand up. I always tell people our job is to take the architect's drawings and make sure the building stands up and doesn't fall down. That's what structural engineers do.
Yeah.
And so building performance just means that it's gonna work structurally.
Yeah. Do you guys get into looking at kind of the moisture planes and the drainage planes and things like that as well?
Sometimes, not often, but sometimes, yeah. From the civil standpoint, yes, we'll look at that and see where you're going to drain away. But as far as the building goes, that's more of like a toner.
Yeah,
all matters.
The building performance designer and the architect. Sure. So, do you have any stories for us of any projects that have just gone totally the wrong way that you've seen or been around in your career?
How about my personal house?
Sure.
Well, we started that project. So we live out in the country. We did hire a builder. And I designed the foundation, had an architect, well known from here in Houston. And so we got going with the building plans and come out there to watch the concrete get poured and tested. So I had a testing company there to do a slump test. I know probably people don't know what that is, but a slump test is when the concrete comes off the truck. You want to have there's a little cone that you use to take that test. And when you pull the cone off, you want the slump to be about 5-6 inches when you're pouring concrete. Well, they pulled the cone off the first one, and it was like 10 inches.
Oh, wow.
So I went out to the guy and I said, out the truck, out the street, "Are you adding water to this truck, before you pour the concrete?" "Oh, no, sir." And I can't tell my exact words that I said to him from here, but I didn't believe him. We'll put it like that. And so I rejected 2 trucks that were sitting out at the street, so they had to go away. So naturally, the concrete subcontractor, he's not happy about that because he's paying for concrete that he's not going to be able to pour. So the next truck that comes by, it wouldn't even hardly pour down the chute. It was that stiff.
The opposite problem.
So, and then trying to watch these guys pour concrete and trying to teach them how to use a concrete vibrator to make sure you get up against the forms and stuff. That's interesting. Finally, we got to framing and got it through all that. And the builder absolutely hated me because I'd come out there on the weekends and take my orange spray can and say, "Nope, I don't want this stud. Nope,
mark some studs.
Mark some studs. No, X." So, but we finally got through it, and actually ended up firing the builder. So we ended up, after the framing stage, that my wife and I took it over and
really
we did it ourselves.
Can you share with us kind of what he was doing wrong? Kind of why did he end up getting off the project?
Because he wanted to do it his way, and we were wrong. He was right. It was one of those kind of guys.
Right.
We just said, no, we're done. And then we caught the plumber stealing stuff from the job site.
Oh, wow. So if you hadn't, had that knowledge, and if you hadn't done that slump testing yourself, right? Let's just say this was, Joe homeowner's house where that foundation was getting poured. I mean, what are the implications to having that concrete mix being off and in the way that's going to perform?
Well, for your listeners, so if the concrete's too wet, there's too much water in it. That's why you have those kind of slump tests. What that means is it's probably going to crack. You're going to get a lot more shrinkage cracks in it. It's not going to perform as well over time. And it's not as strong as what the specifications were. And you will end up with a lot of cracking in it.
Yeah, they say there's 2 things that's always true about concrete, right? It's hard and it cracks. All concrete.
All concrete cracks, but the more water you put in it, the more of those cracks you're going to see.
Right, for sure. All right, so I'm going to switch gears a little bit here and ask you a couple questions that I'm trying to ask all of our guests. And it's kind of unrelated to what we've been discussing, but I always love hearing these answers. So tell me in your mind, what's your dream customer? What's the dream client? And this may be a lot different for you as an engineer than for me as a builder or an architect.
I think it's somebody who's my dream client is somebody who comes back and talks to us and goes through it, and we can talk to and get through the design process, and they're happy at the end of the day. They say, "Oh, these are great plans." Well, that makes us happy.
On the flip side of that, what's somebody that is maybe the nightmare client, or maybe like who shouldn't go through this process? What kind of person's not suited for going through the custom home building process?
I haven't really met anybody that's not really suited for it. A lot of times we get a lot more questions, which are all good from other engineers that are, they know how to do the calculations things. They don't know our particular business and what we do, but they do understand the physics behind it.
Right.
So that's always interesting sometimes to go through those and explain, and which we don't mind explaining that to people.
Yeah.
How this works and why it works, and these are the charts and these are the calculations and this is what happens. But we really don't have that many nightmare clients.
That's good. I think your level of exposure to the client's a little more limited than mine would be, or even the architect, right? Because we're married to him for 12 months or 16 or 18 months, and y'all might be married to him for 2 or 3 months, if you're doing inspections, maybe a little longer than that. But it's a different dynamic maybe than what I have, right?
Oh yeah, because they're looking for something that's finished, a finished product. Most people go out to look at a house, whether it's in the framing stage or they look at it, okay, that's nice. There's a lot of wood in here. Most people don't really exactly understand what they're looking at.
Yeah. So do you guys offer, I should have asked this earlier at the beginning when we were talking about your company, but do you guys offer any other services outside of just structural and civil engineering and inspections? Do you guys do forensic work? Do you do any other services?
We do. We do offer forensic work. We do anything from civil and structural, anything to patio additions to multi-story commercial buildings. This last year, we started a land development department. So we have some big land jobs that are working on to do land planning. We're saying, okay, most customers or clients come in and they say, okay, I just bought 50 acres. I want to know how many houses can I get on this 50 acres? Right. So we do things like feasibility studies.
Okay.
To check those out and make sure, okay, this is how much you can get. These are the detention requirements. This is where the utilities come from. These are where the city codes and what's required. And you have to talk to the city. Do you have enough utilities for 100 houses out here on this? Or,
right.
Or,
how are you getting power out here? How are you getting water and sewer?
Right. Right. So we go through all that. Is it in a floodplain? Is there a floodplain running through your property?
Right. How's it all going to drain? Where's all that displaced water going to go to? And all these houses are built.
That's right. So when you get that much acreage, you do something called a hydrology analysis. Because that means is whatever is it currently draining, you can't change that or you can't increase that. So it affects people downstream.
Awesome. So I guess lastly, tell us how, if people want to work with you, clients or engineers or whoever's listening, if they want to work with you, how do they find BEC?
Okay. Well, we have a website.
Of course.
That's BECengineer.com. That's our, just go on our website and look at that. We want to give out phone numbers.
Sure. You can give your office number.
Our office number is 832-240-3771.
Any social media stuff? You do any Facebook or LinkedIn or anything like that?
No, we really don't. We do have on our website, we do have some links to some other client or some other people and testimonials and podcasts from other times that we've done podcasts.
Great. So Karl, thanks so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it. I appreciate you and Reese and all the rest of the team there. You guys are always a joy to work with.
Thank you.
And, your support means a lot to me and other builders and people. And you're one of those guys that I know that I can always call and you're going to talk to me on the phone. You're going to respond to my text or my email. So that's always, very comforting to know.
Well, we truly believe that. And I preach that culture in our group because I've heard it once, I've heard it 1,000 times is this engineer or that engineer won't call me back or doesn't respond. And I said, no, that's not acceptable. And even an email to me is like a phone message. if you can't respond right then, you just say, okay, I see your email and I'll get back to you.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. That's unfortunately getting harder and harder to find these days. So thank you.
It's a culture I grew up in. That's
yeah, that's awesome. So thanks a lot for coming on today. Great
Curtis.
to see you.
Thanks for having me.
And also a big thanks to you guys who are listening and watching. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Your Project Shepherd podcast. We teach here that every successful project has 4 key components. It's represented by a very simple child's drawing of a house. The foundation is planning. The left wall is your team. The right wall is communication. And the roof that protects it all is proper execution. So be sure and check back next week to see what's up next for our heroes, Brian and Heather, and also to listen to a great interview with Toner Kirsting of Toner Home Matters. We're going to discuss building performance and building science and what that means to you as a consumer. See you next time.